Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1, Bye-bye budget.
Just look at the president's budget that he just put forward. It's not so much a budget as a manual for the progressive left's vision. Higher taxes, more debt, bigger government.
Coming in at $4.1 trillion and bringing tax increases of over $2.8 trillion. President Obama's final budget is not small. Over 10 years, it would increase funding for Democratic-favored social programs and add around $400 billion for infrastructure and green energy projects. But while liberals are celebrating the president's budget, Republicans are furious. They say the new spending and taxes represent a liberal wish list lacking bipartisan support. Notably, conservatives also slammed the budget's failure to address ballooning entitlement costs and the growing federal deficit. According to the White House, the president's proposed 2016-2017 spending would add, get this, $62 billion to the deficit. Why did President Obama propose a budget with no hope of passing? Is President Obama playing politics with the country's budget? I ask you, Pat.
Well, the president wants to lay out what would be his agenda if he could get it. He's not going to get it. It's dead on arrival. The Republicans aren't even going to hold hearings on it. But, John, the more interesting question is, Donald Trump, the winner of the New Hampshire primary down in Louisiana, went after the Republican House and the Republican Senate for having basically capitulated last year and for collaborating with Obama and for not fighting, which means he's reaching into the Ted Cruz wing of the party, which is not necessarily his own, it's what Cruz has, in order to broaden his base for the South Carolina primary. Look, the real battle here is not between the president and Congress and Republican Congress. It's going to be inside the Republican Party between now and the end of the primaries.
No.
That's right. This is a battle within the Republican Party about that budget. The president's budget is actually modeled after the agreement they reached in October between the Republicans and the Democrats to much applause, apparently. And for all of the talk about debt on arrival, there are several initiatives in that budget that are likely to pass. One is more money for cybersecurity. Another is more money for the cancer moonshot, and also an expanded earned income tax credit for people who work who don't have children to reward work. And those are things Republicans and Democrats agree upon. So you have to discount a lot of the rhetoric, but I think it's incredibly disrespectful to this president that for the first time in 40 years, they are not inviting the budget director to testify on Capitol Hill. They are just dismissing it. And I don't think that doesn't serve democracy well.
John, I think one of the problems here with the budget is that there's no entitlement reform in it. And that's a big problem with the CBO curve saying that the federal deficit is going up in 2017. Again, my generation has a big problem there if those programs are not reformed. And they should be reformed in ways that protect the people at the bottom of the economic ladder, but actually make some changes in terms of eligibility and costing for people who are more wealthy and younger people, so it's sustainable. But another problem here, and I think Republicans should have invited the White House budget director to come to Congress and challenge, make it the case as to why this isn't a serious budget in terms of this escalating spending, because the president, purveys this idea that the more you spend, the growth of government, the more equitable society will be and the more productive society will be. And I think Republicans fundamentally disagree with that. And I think the positive for having that debate in Congress is that actually, when it comes to it, that's the real debate between the left and right about notion of government.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that the president's final budget is a political manifesto, not a starting point for serious budget negotiations? Is that your view, Tom Brogan?
Yes, sir. That's
Clarence's
perfectly correct.
term, but I can't stand it. I have to respond. Again, the budget is modeled after an agreement Republicans and Democrats struck in October. They agreed to raise dollar for dollar defense spending and domestic programs. So more money for defense, more money for some domestic programs. Hey, I think extending preschool is not a democratic liberal idea. That's something everybody can
cyber
approve
is an
of.
area of agreement.
This is part of the problem of trying to do serious business during an election year,
Right.
Especially when these are all sensitive issues. I think Pat's right that we're talking about a conflict within the Republican Party. What's interesting to me is the Republican front runner, Donald Trump, is in favor of preserving and protecting Social Security, Medicare, those entitlements, which means like everybody else, he respects that as a third rail issue that is not going to be easily solved, and it's not going to be solved this year for sure.
Solved, it is not going to be touched.
Not going to be
in an
touched. Yeah,
election
this
year.
is a third
Look,
rail
the
issue.
Republican
Let
constituency
me
is
say
over
very quickly.
65.
I think Social Security
think
could be
you're
made solvent for the foreseeable future by simply raising the caps, which is a Bernie Sanders idea, and agreed with by a majority of Americans in polls. And yet there's no serious talk about it.
Bernie Sanders gets a
Yeah,
nomination.
but that's how you say the most
Bernie
popular
will
programs
lose
on the
49
budget.
states if he comes out for reforming Social Security.
Right.
Look, Trump is running for the Republican nomination for president. They are not going to touch Social Security and Medicare.
Which is why the fact that it's not in the budget is not even worth talking
But
about.
if it's to spark a debate, which it is in the election year, right, we all agree that
No,
policies
it's
that
not.
play
We
here.
don't have debates in election year. You win elections.
No, but why is it so if the president is not running for election, the president can actually say, here's a liberal idea, here's how I would
the
reform
president's
entitlements.
party is running for re-election.
No,
But this is part of the frustration.
He's not going to throw his body across
don't you
the
talk to
railroad
Hillary?
tracks.
Why is part of the frustration that's buoying up Trump's campaign, though? Because a lot of, especially working class Americans out there, are frustrated by Washington not getting anything done. And Trump is talking about the issues Washington doesn't want to talk about, like third rail issues, like Social Security and Medicare and trade and immigration. Whether you agree with his stance or not, at least he's bringing it out to the front of public debate, and he's benefiting from it.
And he's saying what working people want to hear,
That's
basically,
right.
because they've gotten the shaft on a lot of these issues.
Exactly.
And they're not
Exactly.
gonna get
Exit
the shaft on
question.
Social Security.
Will Democratic House and Senate candidates campaign on Obama's budget, and if so, will it help them or hurt them? Help or hurt,
You got
Pat?
to turn it around. If it will help, they will. If it won't, they won't.
The budget is like a one-day
document.
story. It's a document. There are going to be lots of other things. But the president's ideas and his priorities, yes, Democrats are very much going to run on them. And you saw that in the debate between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. They were fighting over who supports President Obama more.
Yeah, look, I just think it's disappointing that the president came into office inspiring young people with the notion that he was going to change Washington, is leaving Washington on the basis of failing to reform those programs which would bankrupt the nation and which young people are likely not to have.
The answer is, and I hope this pulls it together, this budget will help liberals, but it will hurt moderate and conservative Democrats who run for election. Issue 2, the $10 tax.
It's right to do it now when gas prices are really low. And they will be low for quite some time to come, so it's not going to be a disruptive factor in terms of the economy.
President Obama supports increased use of renewable energy, and he opposes the use of fossil fuels. And this week, the president announced plans to introduce a $10 per barrel tax on oil. The White House believes the tax would raise up to $32 billion a year in revenue. Money, the president says, for clean energy research and infrastructure spending. But while liberal advocacy groups have praised the president's plan, not everyone is happy, namely Republicans in Congress. Speaker of the House Paul Ryan says his proposal is, quote, dead on arrival, end quote. And Republicans also disagree with President Obama's claim that the tax would hit oil companies rather than drivers. They fear that oil companies, already stretched by low prices, will transfer the tax to drivers. Is this a pipe dream or a serious tax proposal, Pat?
Look, an oil import fee is an interesting idea. It's sort of a tariff idea. But the Republicans are going to pose it rightly because Barack Obama wants to use the money for what he wants to use it for, et cetera. And they're not going to go along with it. But the whole idea, if you have an oil import fee, frankly, and you reduced other taxes, you could scoop off, the U.S. government could scoop off revenues that would otherwise go to OPEC. But I don't, John, as a practical matter right now, this thing is as dead as it could be.
Well-
And on this one, Ryan is right.
No, the president wants to use it to fund infrastructure. This country's infrastructure is in sore need of improvement. The tax that funds infrastructure, the gas tax, hasn't been raised for, I think, 16 or 18 years. This $10 a barrel fee would be phased in over 5 years and then indexed for inflation. The oil companies would pass it on to the consumers, which would add up to something like 18 cents more a gallon. I was in Ohio last week. Gas was under $1.50 a gallon. If you can't raise money now with a user fee on people who drive and who use gasoline, when can you do it, and how do we fund the infrastructure projects that we need?
We'll find out.
Well, Donald Trump will fix it. Okay.
But that's why we're in this situation, though, where the Republicans are married to the idea of no new taxes, even when it's a reasonable tax for something everybody wants, which is infrastructure
If you came in and
improvement.
reduced let me say this, if you came in and put tariffs on and then say cut all the taxes on small business income, I'd be with you 100%.
But the American driver
But these guys won't
would
do it.
face escalating prices. I think there's a problem here. We're talking about there's still a doubt in the economy, a fundamental doubt in a lot of people. If you're taking more money out of people's wallets, and this, the analysts say between 18 and 25 cents a gallon, okay, that would be the increase. That's a bad idea at this point in time to take that money out when the economy is beginning to uptick, and we see positive data. Let's not do that now. But also, I think
Tell me what positive
there is
data
a
you've
perishable
seen in the
line.
last-
American
What
oil
positive
imports are
data
going
have
to
you
decline
seen in
anyway because
February?
the
you're talking
shale
over each other.
energy revolution is going to define this country's energy
An
independence.
oil
So it's
import fee,
That's already happening.
import fee will raise the price of oil, and your shale will go back to producing it. The problem
but
is
shale
we'll
is
start
getting more
using
efficient.
our
Shale-
own rather than the foreign oil.
Shale is not going to say.
Question, please, watch the over-talker. It's very tough on the eardrum.
Sorry, John.
Tougher
And I'm in
on
a key
the brain,
seat here, so
too.
it comes in 4 directions,
Okay. The swivel.
Is it smart to tax the oil industry in order to subsidize green energy? Yes or no, Pat?
No, the answer is no. I mean, if the green energy wants to come along, windmills and all the rest of it becomes cost competitive, fine.
Yeah, but
why
the
should we
tax,
subsidize
the
it?
tax isn't to subsidize. The tax is to go and build infrastructure.
It's
So
to
that's not.
to raise the price of the other form of energy.
Look, I
it's
think
to
it's
build
a,
infrastructure.
It's about it, and I think Democrats are heading for a whirlwind of their own making in the sense that the green energy at the moment is not competitive, and it's going to drive up American energy bills.
Actually,
Yeah, well,
it is
it has a-
competitive.
yeah, it is
Without
It's
subsidies,
very
without
competitive.
It is
subsidies?
competitive, and it's growing on its own. It
Yeah.
could grow faster with subsidies. But more important, really more urgent, is the infrastructure. How many more bridges have to
Totally.
collapse before we get serious about this?
The exit question is, you can take 1 out of 3. The Supreme Court barred President Obama's new rules on carbon emissions from taking effect until legal challenges are heard. Is his climate change plan in peril? Yes or no, Pat?
I think it is.
No, it's a pause, and 5 states have already stepped forward and said they're going to continue with their plans to phase out coal. The coal industry is dying regardless of any Obama regulations.
But the shale industry is growing exponentially, and I think, but the next president will define American climate change policy necessarily now.
And this is one more of those things that's not going to get done in an election year, but at least people need to talk about it.
Exit question number 2. Will Democratic presidential and congressional candidates support Obama's oil tax increase? Yes or no, Pat?
I think, Bernie Sanders would support something like that. The question is Hillary. I'm not sure Hillary would go all out for that.
Anything that has the word tax attached to it is going to be handled delicately on the campaign trail.
In other words, not a tax, it's a revenue enhancement.
Right.
No.
Right.
That's my answer, no.
No, but yeah, not a tax, a revenue enhancement. That's right.
Exit 3 out of 3.
Oh, my.
Is Obama's oil tax proposal the political equivalent of kryptonite, gravitational wave for Hillary Clinton? Yes or no?
Well, I just think it's dead for this year,
No.
John.
No.
It's dead, and we're killing it.
Do the best we can. But I think a slight increase like that is something people wouldn't notice with oil prices low right now, and they're going to stay that way for the foreseeable future.
It is a killer in the general election. Issue 3, the Panther and the Super Bowl. Performing halftime at last Sunday's Super Bowl 50, Beyonce Knowles Carter made a big impression, leading her black beret-wearing dancers in X-shaped homages to Malcolm X and raised fist salutes. Beyonce seemed to endorse the Black Panther movement. The dancers also posted a photo in support of Black Lives Matter, an advocacy group campaigning against perceived racism in the U.S. justice system. Some welcomed Beyonce's linkage between the 21st century Black Lives Matter and the 20th century Black Panthers, made famous by leaders such as Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, and Stokely Carmichael. But others were less amused. These critics argue the Black Panthers were criminals who did little to advance equal rights. And some say the Black Lives Matter movement fuels community tensions and deters effective policing. Question, was Beyonce wrong? I ask you, Clarence.
Well, first of all, Beyonce was engaged in a massive publicity campaign for her next record album, although they aren't called record albums anymore. What are they? Well, CDs, whatever, digital sales anyway, number one. Number two, the Black Panthers and Black Lives Matter are very respected by a lot of people in this country, especially those who buy hip-hop music. And so we're really talking about here, it's not a history lecture, it is a Super Bowl halftime show, which I thought was pretty entertaining, and then afterwards I found out it was controversial.
Right. Same here. I watched it, thought it was terrific. I didn't really get all the symbolism, and I think she did a beautiful job of basically tracing Black history from the middle of the last century on up till today, and also drawing attention to really a shooting of a young man in right around where the Super Bowl arena was. He was shot 15 times. And trying to surrender. So there's some real issues here. The people who have trouble with it are basically the right-wing media, Rush Limbaugh, and Law and Order, Rudy Giuliani. That's about it.
The Black Panthers were a group of killers. They're murdering people. Huey Newton, they're thugs. They're out of prison. Eldridge Cleaver was famous for his book about raping white gals. This was a stupid thing to do by Beyonce, who is a great entertainer normally. I think she's hurt herself. But the real star of that Super Bowl was Lady Gaga, and I am not a groupie. Her rendition of the America's national anthem was one of the most beautiful I have ever seen. She put heart and soul into it, and I think she helped herself, even with the far right.
I think she's a star, but I gotta say, the Panthers, like Black Lives Matter, is a very locally oriented group. There were some thugs in the Panthers, especially the Oakland chapter, during a horrible period there, but there were a lot of other Panthers who registered people to vote, who engaged in active social action as well as political action quite legitimately. And there were so many abuses against them by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI and COINTELPRO that a number of the survivors of Panther leaders in Chicago received a big legal settlement.
One of the things here is that, if you look at the legacy of civil rights in America, I have to say, this is why I have a problem with Beyonce doing this, because there was far too much of a criminal element with the Black Panthers and a militant. I absolutely wasn't. But the history of it and the people who inspired me learning about the U.S. were people like Booker T. Washington and Martin Luther King and people marching and being hosed and the long train of that.
But it's just like with Black Lives Matter. Okay. Until somebody raised a fuss, police brutality was not an issue.
Okay, but that
the Panthers raised it, and they did a big favor.
You're talking over each other.
Beyonce had a big police escort going there, and the Mario Wood shooting. I would disagree with Eleanor that it's clear that he was surrendering.
John, you made a mistake in your opening.
We got 4 people and they're all talking at the same time.
You made a mistake in your opening. You made a mistake in your opening. Stokely Carmichael was not a member of the Black Panthers. He did say he was the one that made Black Power. He was at SNCC. He became a Marxist, and he went over to Africa, and he died. Died in Africa.
Not in the Panthers. You may have him mixed up with Huey Newton or Eldridge Cleaver, those folks. But yeah, he did help to inspire the Panthers. There was a Black Panther Party in Lowndes County, Alabama, which registered people to vote and also worked on local brutality issues there.
They weren't famous as voter registrants.
But the people in the Black Lives Movement look back on some of these figures, and they take pride in what some of these figures did. Not all of them, but
what does that do for the Black Panthers that they take pride in them?
Should
I
they?
think Clarence just pointed out what the Black Panthers did, and it was an assertion. It was an assertion of emerging power in a society that had really marginalized them. And I think that's what we're still arguing about.
Look, it should be a celebration. It's a celebration of America. It's flags, a Star-Spangled Banner, America the Beautiful, and all of this. And it's a very uplifting thing. What are we getting ourselves back into the 60s and the Panthers for?
It was a very uplifting performance there. Like I say, I didn't even realize it was controversial until after it was over and Rudy Giuliani was complaining. I mean, they formed an X on the field, and they had afros and berets. Well, you know, I have a beret, and I used to have an afro. So I don't think I'm a criminal. You know?
The Panthers were the cultural underpinning for some of the reactions that we're seeing today, and I think she did a brilliant job of sort of tracing, 65 years of history in a kind of sensational way.
Issue 4. Uncle Sam wants your daughter. Should women be forced to register for the draft? Yes, says President Obama and U.S. military leaders and Democrats and many Republicans. In recent days, a number of GOP presidential candidates have emerged in favor of women being eligible for the draft. But not everyone is happy with this consensus. Ted Cruz, for one, says that drafting women is quote-unquote nuts. Question: should women be forced to register for the draft when they turn 18? Eleanor Clue.
Well, young men have to register within 30 days after turning 18. I don't believe there's any prospect that we're really going to have a draft. The volunteer army seems to be working just fine. But if women want to compete in the military and to hold down jobs that are classified as combat jobs, I don't think there's any rational reason to exclude them from signing up and registering like their male counterparts. And I think most young women agree with that. They don't see a problem.
Let me ask you required.
Well, would you like to make it voluntary? If it was voluntary, I'm sure probably most of them would sign up. But if it's a requirement for the guys,
military service,
requirement for the women,
is voluntary.
It is now.
Well,
now,
yes, but you were just saying.
And we should keep it that way.
I agree with that. I'm not
John,
disagreeing.
this is about registration, and the idea is utterly silly. If you register, presumably you're to be available for the draft. And if you drafted people along the lottery system or any other system, you wind up with 50% women. Do you really think we'd do as well on Guadalcanal and Normandy if we had 50% women in the military? You're not going to draft them at the same rate as men. Why would you then put them in the registry?
I think politically speaking, if anything ends the draft, this will do it. If they start drafting women, because the blowback is going to be tremendous. While you're absolutely right that rationally women ought to have the same rights as men, we're talking about a heavily emotional political issue here.
Should they have the same requirements as men?
Yes, and they do have the same.
In other words, be drafted in the same numbers.
No, they have to meet the same requirements if they want to take on
But if you
certain
register
jobs
for the
and combat.
draft, should you draft them in the same number as men?
No.
We're not talking about a draft.
Well,
We're
what
not.
is- what is
We
the
have a
registry
volunteer
for?
army. Well, young
what?
men today register.
For what?
For the draft.
For the draft, but the
Okay.
draft is not going to happen, so women can sign up for this same imaginary exercise. And women are parts of militaries, successful
I know that.
militaries all over the world. This is
recent,
not unusual.
In recent years, women in the U.S. military have excelled in human intelligence positions as well, where you do really dangerous work. They've also excelled in terms of areas like carrier, air wing. So this broad, technical, down to human level, women have become very important. The problem we have is, one of the problems I have, for example, in terms of women being open to combat roles is the Marine Corps study. Some people on the left say it was a bad
That's
study.
a separate issue, though, combat roles,
no, it is, but it
which I think
extends
is
to what I'm
settled
saying.
now.
But it extends to why we shouldn't have a draft in the sense that, as Pat says, you know, when we are going, the kind of operational tempo that we could see in a major war where a draft became necessary would cause big problems to have 50%
nail
women on the
that down.
battlefield.
If the war is
Hold
that
on,
nature,
hold
I
on,
don't think it's going to
Clarence.
be a big problem.
Let's nail that down. An extreme national emergency, such as a war with China, should we draft men and women into combat service?
No.
No.
Look, even the Germans at the end of the World War II, when they're completely routed, didn't put women in combat. They put teenage boys and old men.
We
What's the
have
matter
we have
with
a
this country?
volunteer.
They do it in Israel, and we do it here.
Israel stopped the Israeli women go into the military, but none of them go into these combat roles.
Well,
Wait a second,
role
that's
is
not
one
true.
thing, but combat position, we have women in combat all the time because there's no front like there was at
Well, but
Guadalcanal or
should there be
Iwo Jima,
fight? Should there
et
be
cetera. It's a
50
different kind of warfare.
Should you
than
have a
fought these
military
days.
with 50% women and 50%
You don't have
men?
to have
That's
quotas.
a formula for losing
No,
wars.
you don't have to
Well,
have quotas. You don't have to have
It's
quotas.
not quotas. It's just a normal draft.
No, we're
I think-
not going to have a draft in
Then
this
why
country
are you registering them?
because men are registered and we have
they
equality
register
in
for a
this
draft.
country and women, but we're not going to have the draft. You
Okay.
can turn
Don't
me
register the
around.
men
Is
then.
chicken
there a
and
better
egg
way
all
to
the time,
prepare?
as many
Hello,
times as
is
you
there a
want.
better way to prepare for warfare without resorting to the draft?
Yes.
Yes.
Diplomacy.
On a political probability scale from 0 to 10, how likely is it that the next president will ask Congress to require teenage women to
Minor.
register for the draft? 0 to
abyss,
10.
black hole.
Well,
not
it
happening.
depends on who the president is. If it's Bernie or Hillary, I think they might require registration. Republican would not, I believe.
We're out of time practically. False prediction. Pope Francis's plans to meet with illegal immigrants at the U.S. border with Mexico next week to show his support for open borders. It will embroil the Vatican in U.S. presidential politics. Yes or no?
Yes, it already has, and it's foolish and provocative.
It's human rights. It's what Pope Francis does.
Yes.
I would say yes.
The answer is yes. Bye-bye.